I am okay. How are you?
You know, I feel it's so strange. I feel like I'm grieving. I
Really?
feel like I'm grieving. Yeah. So I feel low, but I also feel very, it's weird. It's weird. I think for the first time, I'm really starting to feel the weight of this third lockdown. So it's like I'm oscillating between so many different emotions and feelings. Um, but I keep on coming back to gratitude. And I think the conversation we're going to have today ties into that because I keep thinking, thank God I'm not drinking. You know?
I know. Although a lot of people have so there's this whole thing around dry January being cancelled that because of the pandemic that people, and I only just heard about that. And obviously for you and I,
Yeah.
we don't notice dry January because we have dry lives. So I wanted to know, firstly, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Okay. So I heard about that, I would say a few days ago. Um, and it actually just made me quite sad because I think a lot of people will take that very literally because of everything that is happening right now. I think especially when you are at the point of trying to let go of something like alcohol, you can almost be looking for um, anything to validate why you should drink again. So if something like this is happening on a collective level, everyone's saying, right, right. So so for me, I do find it to be quite worrying, and I'm so happy that there are people out there, sobriety advocates, that are saying no, actually, it's not. Now is the perfect time to make sure that you hold on to it. But I only found out about it a few days ago.
Yeah, because I put out some questions to people, and it's interesting their sort of response. And the reason I particularly, because you and I have so much in common on the subject, and I've got to say, when we were speaking about it, there was a part of me that was like, imagine if we met at that time, whereas now we're just here with our tea. This literally sums you and I up. This is my cup. This is like, if the house was burning down, this would be what I say.
Exactly.
I think that tea, honestly, I always know. So my mum is completely off subject, but I was with my mum a couple of months ago, and there was someone doing the gardening. My mum was like, he seems to drink a lot of tea. And I was like, I reckon he may have had a bit of an issue with alcohol, because honestly, I feel like it's so correlated. Everyone I know that's basically, given up alcohol has become
Is now on tea. That's so funny. That's hilarious, actually. But you
enjoy
know
what
what?
happens at tea times.
Yes, exactly. And I'm sure we'll talk about kind of replacing one for the other. But for me, tea has been a lifesaver. And for people, some people just don't understand it. But it's yeah, I don't know what I would do, especially in this lockdown. I don't know what I would do with that tea.
That's how some people are feeling about alcohol. I think hence the sort of cancelling dry January. It's like, we need whatever support that is. For you and I, that's tea, which of all the vices is probably a better one to have. But for the majority of people, alcohol is like the thing that we do in celebration. It's what we do when things are going wrong. It's like the go-to. So what are your kind of thoughts on, people navigating that space and trying to dismantle that sort of inherent belief system?
I would say something that I found to be very useful and something that I keep on thinking about that's probably useful for so many people is community. And, because I think sometimes individual responsibility is important, but I think when it comes to something like alcohol, there is only so much you can do by yourself, especially at the beginning when you're kind of struggling. And I think we have so much access to community right now, especially online, especially most of us are at home So I think finding some kind of sober community is really important, because you will also have access to other people who are sharing how difficult it is for them. You will have other people that maybe have a bit more time and they're encouraging you to hang on. You'll be able to share when you have cravings, when you feel triggered. You will be able to speak to someone about it. So I think there is something to be said for that individual responsibility, just being disciplined within yourself. But I think community is probably the biggest thing.
That's really interesting you say that, actually, because there is a DryJanuary app if people are Alcohol Change UK, if people are like wanted, because a massive issue I found was, because this isn't necessarily going to be your immediate community that you're surrounding yourself with now. And that when I was going on this journey would be like, I'd kind of go out on my own, try to do it, but I felt like I couldn't communicate within the space that I was in, that I needed to do this. I was supported in it. And so it kept being this like back and forth thing where I would just fail again and again and again, until I discovered Ruby Warrington's Sober Curious podcast, and suddenly it opened up my world and this landscape of a whole new group of people that they weren't AA necessarily, they chosen not to drink, or they really like minimized their alcohol intake. And I was like, here is a language I can speak. And then like people like you coming along and stuff like that. And then suddenly it becomes, now people are like, oh, is it hard? And it's like, it's not even a thing anymore, because I have that support system. And I guess that's kind of to echo what you have just said.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned podcasts as well, because I think when, for example, when people hear something like community, you can feel like you maybe have to join a forum or something like that. But I think just having resources that you can reach to, and I think podcasts are a great way, actually, especially Sober Curious. I would say it's one of my favorites, because it really allows space for people to be human. And when I say that, I mean, it really addresses the gray areas. Some people don't want to give up completely, which is a term that I really don't recommend, giving up. And some people do want to go all the way, right? And I think that kind of platform really allows for that. So regardless of what stage you're at, you're able to connect with people or hear voices that really do align with you. I love that.
100%. And that's the whole thing. It's like, I don't like resigning myself to the term sober, because then people are like, oh, did you have to give up, or do you have a problem? I'm like, this is the choice that I make. Hence why Sober Curious is so interesting, because I also have some friends that will come to me, say that they have a bit of a problem, as in like it doesn't really work with them when they drink, and it's quite clear for everyone from the outside, and they sort of will come to me and say, you know, I want to give up. But then a few like minutes or an hour into the conversation, they're like, but I don't know if I can give up completely. It's like, I'm like, just take it one day as it comes, and figure out what works intuitively for you.
Yes. And you know what, I'd love to ask you, actually, how does it feel now when you have people that you know come to you and say, hey, I think I might have, a challenge with alcohol? Like, how does it feel compared to where you used to be and what your behaviors were with alcohol, to now be that person? What does it feel like?
It was really weird. I actually went for a walk with one of my bestest friends yesterday, and she was like, I'm really interested to explore like being sober curious. I was like, oh really? And she's like, and she said very openly, she was like, I'm very jealous that you've kind of gone down this path and are doing it. She was like, I always thought I could rely on you to be the drunkest person. Or to always be the one like, I did this, but Caggie did this. And I was like, that is true. That was the role that I played very, very well.
Right.
I kind of walked home afterwards, and I just thought, it's not actually something that I think about that much. But what it's done, probably the most like fundamental change, is the way that I viewed the world from my own lens, because I didn't drink, is vastly different. And by that I mean, like, just walking through the streets of London, when I used to drink and I'd be hungover or whatever, everything would feel sort of threatening, like physically, emotionally, spiritually. Everything I'd kind of see like the darkness in it, which sounds awful. Whereas now I just only see kind of light.
Yes.
to be honest.
Yeah.
And I suddenly had that moment yesterday when I was like, wow, my kind of like natural state of being, of course it has these, but it's not like this.
Mm-hmm.
In dealing with something like a global pandemic, it's you need that. You need to kind of create a way of feeling stable in yourself when everything feels very uncertain. So for like, I think that's why you and I both come from the same perspective, that actually abstaining from alcohol is a far better way of going about it than diving into it.
I agree completely, and I resonate so much with what you're saying. And even especially the very last thing that you just said, that realizing that abstaining is the kind of best way to go about it. Because for me, I did try, as we've spoken about before, I did try the moderation. I tried many different things.
The moderation story.
Moderating was, I tried it for years because I just did not want to accept that I can't drink in the way that other people can. I tried everything. I tried, what did I try? I tried being
only one kind of alcohol and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, that's what I tried. So in the beginning, I was like, it must be the spirits. It's not me, it's spirits. So let's stick to wine. Okay, that was the first thing. That didn't. And then I was like, okay, so what if I won't go out all the time. I'm just going to be really mindful about when I go out, because maybe that's the issue. Maybe because I'm going out way too much. No, that was not the issue. That was not the issue. Next thing, I was like, okay, so if I do go out and I'm drinking, after, let's say, 2 glasses of whatever it is, I will have some water. Yeah, right. I never, as if, because for me, I realized that after 2 glasses, because I think everyone has a marker for when they really start to feel like, you know what, now it's a party. For me, it was only 2.
Oblivion.
That didn't work. And then the very last thing I tried, Caggie, was trying to be like, okay, maybe, because I found it very difficult at that time to really take self-responsibility and accountability. I was always just externalizing.
That one's making me drink.
Right? So I was like, it has to be people. And I will say people had something to do with it. Exactly. But it's nothing that, anyone was pushing onto me. I was choosing my environment. But I tried to kind of change the people that I was around. And the same thing was still there. Then I realized, you know what? Moderation is not for me. But I didn't realize that in an empowering way. I had to. I had no other choice at that point. But it was the best thing to have
tried every possible scenario of trying to keep alcohol in your life, and the universe
right.
was like, no.
Right. Did you try moderation as well?
I had very similar experience, and that I was like, yeah, maybe it's these people, or maybe it's like this city, maybe if I move country. And there is something to be said for the environment socially that you grow up in, because of course, like, you play that, like I just said, my friend was being like, I'm kind of jealous that you managed to actually shift that role, but that took going away, I think. And also I kind of cut myself off from like all social events and stuff like that, because that would put me in a mental framework where I was like, I'm going to drink. And I didn't allow enough space between like reacting and responding. So I would just react like to the uncomfortable anxiousness by grabbing a drink. And then, like you say, it's around the 2, maybe 3 marker when I'm like, I could go home, I'm going home. No, I'm going out. And it was like playing Russian roulette. I just never quite knew what was happening. A bit like you, I could end up waking up in like Bermondsey or something, like, how did I only went out for a pint of milk? How did I end up here?
How did I end up here? And this makes me think now, as we speak about it, what that can look like in lockdown, because you're kind of in the same environment. So there are only so many strategies that you can actually try, you know? So it's almost like you actually have to face yourself.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's why it's a great opportunity, because it was actually I created almost like my own isolation to control things. And then it was really actually when when I started taking a bit more responsibility, and actually was like, I'm going to have to put myself in those scenarios and situations and feel those uncomfortable feelings that I'm trying to avoid with alcohol in order to get through. And then what shifted was, because I remember I went to this party on my own in the country. I didn't know anyone there. I had to stay in an Airbnb by myself. It was the perfect opportunity for me to just like get fucked up, basically. It felt like weird and low, like on my own stuff. And driving there, I binged on the Sober Curious podcast. And I didn't drink. I went home at like 12:30, 1 a.m. back to the Airbnb. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, this is the feeling that I'm going to remember. And that became my victory. So every time I was in that situation again, I was like, I want to feel that victory tomorrow morning, and I'm going to abstain now. And then just slowly but surely it became more second nature and more comfortable. Of course, I am very aware that I'm always one decision away from making like the wrong decision. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's something quite humbling about that. Like, you know, you said when you realized that you were someone that can't do moderation, neither am I, but that's quite humbling, because it's like I'm never above it. Do you know what I mean? I'm always just like one decision away from making the wrong one, and that keeps me accountable and in check, if that makes sense.
That makes complete sense. You know what, I've never thought about it that way. I think intuitively I've always known that. As you say it, I'm like, yeah, but I've never heard it vocalized that way. That's amazing. I get it. And you're so right in saying, you know, now is the perfect time to reevaluate your relationship with alcohol if you're having a difficult time, which is why I really don't want anyone to buy into this idea that Dry January is cancelled. I think even if, you know, there are 5 days left for January, it really is never too late. Even show yourself that you can do it for that 5 days. Because I remember actually at the beginning of lockdown, nearly a year ago, oh my goodness, nearly a year ago. Wow, the first lockdown in the UK, nearly a year ago. I would see a lot of people kind of talking about, you know, having wine nights at home. Alcohol was kind of glorified in the beginning because I don't think many people knew just how long we would be in lockdown for. But I feel like now, because it's been such a long time, it's probably at the point where a lot of people are realizing, you know what, I don't actually have a healthy relationship with alcohol. And I can imagine that some people might be feeling quite ashamed about that.
There is a lot of shame around it, and that's something I mean, I definitely experienced shame. What would your advice be for someone that is feeling shame? Because I think shame, you know, it's such a negative emotion, and it's kind of, they say the difference between guilt and shame is like, shame is I am bad versus like I did something bad. And I think it becomes such a vicious cycle with alcohol that it's like, where you feel bad that you don't feel in control of it, and therefore you keep kind of going back to it. So what would your advice be for sort of someone dealing with the shame aspect to it?
I think for someone dealing with the shame, I would say the first thing, because with all of these kinds of things, whether it's shame or guilt, etc., it always has to start internally. Because when we start by focusing on what's outside, for example, me just saying, just try not drinking for 5 days, that's strategic and it doesn't actually do anything internally. I would say it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but you need to be clear on why it is that you feel ashamed, right? Why do you actually feel ashamed? Is it because you know that it's becoming a little bit of a problem? Is it because you feel like you've lost all control and there's no way of coming back? Is it what's actually making you feel ashamed? And then you have to allow yourself to begin where you are. If you see that this is not working, what next step do you actually need to take? So I think it's about addressing why you feel that shame, which can be a little bit difficult because to even sit with it can be uncomfortable. But I think it's also understanding that regardless of what everything looks like now, you were doing the very best with what you had. You didn't know how long you were going to be in lockdown for. You didn't know how mentally taxing just being in this environment that we're in as a collective was going to be. So you were trying to self-protect in the best way you knew how. And it can sound very odd, but a lot of people drink in the way that they do as a way of self-protecting, right? It's a way of, wanting to feel something, wanting to fulfill a need that you're not quite sure what the need is. So I think when it comes to the point of you feeling like this is not working and I am to blame, it's about addressing why you feel that shame and then deciding the next step, which is why I think the things that we spoke about before, community, is hugely important because you'll realize you're not the only one that feels this way. If you have friends that you can speak to, say, hey, I actually think I've been drinking a little bit too much. Have you also been experiencing this? You would be surprised how many people are also going through the exact same thing. So I would say addressing the cause, addressing why you feel ashamed. It doesn't have to be, an elaborate thing, but just understanding why. Why do I actually feel this way? And what do I want to feel like instead? What's going to make me feel that way?
Having zero judgment with it.
Yeah, compassion.
And I think, like you say, you'd be very surprised. We struggle with this, but in terms of communicating when we need support, we're not very good at it. Actually, people really want to help, but we're just not very good at asking for help.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, I've got a couple of things that people have said.
Okay.
So, how to explain being sober.
Oh.
When like people are like, do you want to drink? And you're like, no. And they're like, do you not drink? That whole like thing.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I know that whole thing. Yes, I do.
Right. Are you okay? Something wrong with you?
What I would say, right, is never ever feel you, especially if you're at the beginning of your journey, or even if you've been on that journey for a little while, it can feel like you have to over explain, like you have to give people the full details of what happened. You don't. You don't.
I did a piece for like the Evening Standard the other day, and they were like, what do you tell people when you say you don't really drink? And I was like, well, I got so annoyed by the question that I started turning around being like, well, if I do, I'll spiral into a pit of depression and despair so dark it will take me weeks to recover. And when I read it in print, I was like, that does not translate with the humor I intended. It just sounded like I was fucking crazy.
You know what? That is a brilliant answer. If anyone's looking for something that will not allow further inquiry, I love that. So I either think, we don't ever have to over explain, or if you are a person with a sense of humor and, the humor is going to translate, feel free to make it a little bit awkward. I would say make it a little bit awkward, just make it jokey so that it can move on. But I would say something that I commonly see, something that I also went through, is that need to over explain, but you don't. You can either say, alcohol doesn't agree with my body. I remember saying things like, alcohol doesn't agree with my body was a very, very big one, because it's true. It doesn't agree with me. Yeah. You can say that you're
really like hardcore about it and just be like, sometimes I am just like, I just don't. And people are kind of like,
yes,
make uncomfortableness go back on them. I'm like, does it make you feel uncomfortable?
Yes.
And they're like, maybe I have something to it.
And you know what? It's that kind of simplicity. I just don't. And if someone presses on and they say why, I think this is when you realize that you have the right to decide how you want to move forward. I think discernment is an important thing. There can be something empowering in you telling your story if the situation calls for it. If someone is genuinely curious and they say, oh, why? And you feel like, you know what, I want to share my story, then you can decide. But I think I just don't is also a very, very, very powerful and simple answer. And to just hold your own space after you say that, you know, because again, something that might happen, because it can seem so simple because we have a nature to over explain, you might feel like it's not going to be enough for the other person, but that's not your responsibility. So I think I just don't. It's good.
100%. Yeah, we also came up with some questions. So for some people, they end up replacing one vice with another.
Mm-hmm. What vices are you talking about?
Tea brand. A lot of instances, this can be sugar. I know. Oh yeah, this is Sydney wrote this for me, but it's as my voice because I was like, wait, that's me. She's like, I know my honey intake has gone through the roof. I literally am like, every buying another thing of honey, but I'm like, look, that's gonna be my fucking vice. Did you find yourself replacing alcohol cravings with something else? Tea.
Tea. But for actually, in all honesty, in the beginning, and this is also quite common for a lot of people, for a very short time, I replaced it with cigarettes.
Wow.
I replaced it with, and I was not even a big smoker to begin with. Yeah, so common. I was never a big smoker to begin with, but because I just didn't want to let go of something. And because of the social aspect of it as well, if I was with friends and they were drinking, I would be like, okay, a cigarette, I'll have a cigarette. So I can still feel like part of what's happening.
Still feeling a bit
yeah, exactly. So for the first, I would say 7 months into my sobriety, I was smoking. And after that, I was like, Africa, what are we doing? I had to sit us down and just say, what are we actually doing? Do you want to smoke? And I realized that for me, I just didn't want to smoke anyway, but I was trying to replace something. But the healthy replacement after that, was tea. And tea came into my life because I realized that, and it can sound really weird, but I realized that in all of the time that I was drinking, I never appreciated anything for the way that it tasted, ever. Even food, when I really think about it, as in when I was out with other people, because I'd be drinking and at some point you almost lose your taste, or I'd just black out and not remember what I ate. So there's that. So there's that. But when I discovered tea in a ritualistic way, not in a like English breakfast Earl Grey type of way. Nothing wrong with that, obviously. Nothing wrong with that, obviously, but in the more kind of ritualistic ways, as in the tea rituals that you see in Africa and in Asia, I was like, oh my goodness, there's a whole world out there where you can still have connection with people, where you can still sit with people and share something and taste and smell things, and you get to remember it. How amazing is that? So when I discovered tea, just in general, it was just amazing for me. It was amazing for me. And the fact that instead of inviting friends to have a drink or to go out, I could just be like, do you want to come and share tea with me? And we could sit and talk for ages. And yeah, so for me, tea has just been a lifesaver.
You make a really interesting point, because at its core, alcohol originally is about ceremony and rituals.
Yes.
It's just really departed from that space.
Yeah, it's really
well, we really departed from that space with it, and for most people it has. So I think that actually is a really beautiful point. It's like creating that sense of community in another space.
Yes.
That's, progressive and helpful for you. And actually, like tea time's the best time.
It is. And you would be, for anyone else, listening to this, even just try it. Even if you're not a big tea person, just find, you would be surprised how many people really just want to do normal things with you as well. They don't really want to get trashed all the time. You know, I would always see a lot of friends that I had partied so much with. It's almost like I would see a new version of them when we were sitting down to drink tea, to just talk. And it would be like, we're getting to know each other all over again, but we've seen each other in so many states.
Yeah, like that shit's got to go to the grave, by the way.
Right? So you would be surprised how there are so many people that just want to do other things that don't revolve around alcohol. So you can still have ritual. I think ritual is such a beautiful thing, by yourself or with other people. So you can still have ritual, just in a way, as you said, that actually adds instead of takes away.
How would you, what would your advice be for someone who has the fear around stepping out of like a friendship group because that is the pressure that keeps them going? Because I think that that's quite a big one. Because you have to get to a point of confidence that takes time, and not everyone can have that instantly.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. And I think a lot of people do continue drinking in a way that doesn't serve them because of that aspect of it. I will lose all of my friends if I do. And I would always say, ask yourself, is that actually true? Is that actually true? Or are you making it true so that you don't have to let go of something? So again, it's like some internal questioning that you have to ask yourself, because I truly believe if you have a genuine group of friends that absolutely love you, no matter what is happening in your life, they want you to get better. They do, right?
Yeah,
they do.
So I think about you being able to address a part of yourself you're not entirely willing to let go of.
For sure, 100%, because I thought the exact same thing, and maybe you did too, Caggie. I thought the exact same thing. I'm going to lose all of my friends, etc., etc. And I'm going to be honest, there were people that I had to let go of, right? Because it just wasn't supportive of where I wanted to get to. But I realized that the relationships we had weren't really rooted in anything that, in anything that was strong, in anything that was sustainable. It was just about partying. And even though I did feel, a sense of loss, which is absolutely fine, over time, a very short period of time, I knew exactly why it had to happen. But for the friendships that, were rooted in something truly authentic, they were so happy. In fact, they were like, oh, thank you. It's about time. When, I chose myself in that way, because it allowed us to have a deeper friendship. And I think just expect that you will be fully supported by your people.
And if you aren't, those aren't your people and the right ones.
Yeah. And that's where you can find community again, as we've spoken about many times.
Amazing. Thank you so much, my love. Is there anything else you want to add for any advice for anyone that's thinking about doing Dry Jan or exploring variety a little bit?
Yeah, I would say it's quite simple, but I would say just stick with it. Stick with it. It can sound, it's like, yeah, Africa, great. Yeah, I'll just stick with it. No, but really, even if it's just a few days, even if it's just a week, I think there's something so beautiful in showing yourself that you can do it, that it is possible. And I think just for this month or the rest of this month, just give yourself that challenge. It can really be exciting. It doesn't have to be this dark and dreary thing, which is why I don't like to use the term giving up, because it can make you feel quite powerless. But just remember, you're choosing, right? Just for the next month or the next couple of weeks, whatever you decide, you are choosing to meet a different part of yourself. So I would say just stick with it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.